I think the ramifications of what Donald Trump's are doing is grave and serious. But there is a core piece to the American people which, when there is that leadership, they will answer not just the call, the responsibility that comes, but they have not been challenged to do that.
I've known Rahm Emanuel for a very long time. He worked for Bill Clinton. He worked for Barack Obama, obviously. And in fact, I did a profile of him back in the day when I was on 60 Minutes. I got to know him so well, or at least research him so well, that I knew the reason his middle finger is shorter than the others on his right hand is because he sliced it off in a meat slicer as a teenager when he was working at Arby's. Yes, true story. So it's very exciting for me to get a chance to catch up with him, to talk about what's going on in the country, to talk about the Trump administration and everything it's done, to talk about the Democratic Party and everything many people feel it hasn't done, and everything in between. So, Rahm Emanuel, welcome to Next Question. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
And it's great to see you again. Mm-hmm. And I'm seeing a lot of you.
No.
Rahm, Mr. Ambassador.
Yeah.
Congressman. You've been
Can't keep a job.
You've been on Jon Stewart. You were on Bill Maher. You were writing for the Washington Post. You just signed a deal with CNN. And, of course, most importantly, you're sitting down with me. So the question is...
Yeah, that was like reversed order. We were building up.
What gives? Are you running for president or something, Rahm?
Well, if I have something to say, I'll say that. But, well, first of all, as an ambassador, you can't say anything. So I had a...
So you feel newly liberated?
Yeah. I got to get out of jail card. So that's number one. But I also think things are at a critical juncture, both for the country, first and foremost, and also for the party. And I have, when I was congressman and chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, we had lost the 2000 presidential, the 2002 midterm, and the 2004 presidential. Kind of similar dire circumstances for the party, but I also think in the sense of what's at stake. I don't know if I'm going to run. I think a lot of people are spending time appropriately. Obviously confronting Donald Trump. My
You mean
view,
thinking about running?
No, well, they're a lot of people, just because I think there's so much at stake. That said, and that's going to work, in 2000, if you thought about it in politics, in 2026, the midterms, it's a referendum on Donald Trump and the Republican leadership because they run both chambers, both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue. But to get the public to give you the keys to the car between 2026 and 2028, you actually have to have a view of fighting not Donald Trump, but fighting for America. And I have, both through my career working in Congressman as mayor, but also President Obama's chief of staff and senior advisor President Clinton, thought a lot about education, healthcare, retirement security. Those are things I've all worked on. And to me, the thing that's most at risk is the American dream. It's not affordable to many people. It's not accessible to many people. And rather than just, all they want is a shot. And I think, as I've said before, they've gotten the shaft. And so I'm going to spend my time, and if I think about that, and then think about what I've worked on, and have something to offer, I'll think about it. But it's not a yes and no. It's what you'll know in your gut.
I really appreciate how honest you are being, Rahm, because, I've had to...
Because that's a rarity for an Emmanuel?
No, but I've had to ask a lot of people, during the course of my career, what are you going to do? And they hem and haw, or they... but I think that's probably the most honest answer I've ever heard from somebody.
Here's my thing, which is, look, I get the politics of fighting Trump because there's real stakes and real interests. But then if you think also about politics, you have to fight for the American people. And I'm going to spend my time, as I have on education for sakes, and I don't mean to go through my record, but we were the first city to create free community college. If you got a B average in Chicago Public Schools, we made both community college, transportation, and books free. You had to earn it. And we also You couldn't get your high school diploma unless you had a letter of acceptance from either a college, community college, or branch of the armed forces or a vocational school. So we made post-high school universal, first city to do it. And to me, those are like the essentials for access to the American dream. That not just your children, my children, they're going to be, let's be honest, they're going to be okay. I mean, you worry about them, but they're going to be okay. They got an education, they got a loving home, they can navigate. For a lot of other children and families, that's not true. And I want my time is spent thinking about how do you make that dream accessible. And if I think I have an answer to that, then I'll do something. If I don't, or it's not in your belly, I won't.
There's so many things I want to talk to you about, but you mentioned the midterms, so I'm curious, are you thinking about what may happen? And do you think that you're right, it is a referendum on Donald
Yeah, it
Trump
will be.
and the Republican Party. Do you think people, are going to come out in droves? What do you predict
Yeah.
for the midterms?
So, first of all, a month used to feel like a year. A week now feels like a year. So, you're asking me. I want to be clear. April 2025 about what's going to happen in October and November of 2026. A long time. That said, two things that are pretty self-evident now can change. So those are all my caveats. Now I'll just run into it. The most fascinating thing of 2 weeks ago when there was Florida and Wisconsin, while all of it was fascinating, one was the Supreme Court election in Wisconsin wasn't just Milwaukee and Madison. There was depth in the rural areas. Wow. Second, the most fascinating thing to me was Escambia County. It's in Matt Gaetz's district. It's where Pensacola is. It's 14% veterans. The national average is 6, so more than double veterans, not counting active duty in Pensacola, Navy. Donald Trump took it by 19 points, that county. The Democrats won it +3. It had been decades since the last Democrat won it on a federal election. So, if I told you on the night Donald Trump was elected president that the new base for the Democratic Party would be former veterans of the armed forces, you would not have taken that bet. You would have taken that bet. It was never possible. The second thing that's fascinating to me is in 2022, 2023, and 2024, in special elections, the only way Democrats won was low turnout. High turnout we did. Now, every election since November has been very, very high turnout, and Democrats are, short of the 2 Florida seats, won everything. And so it's not totally dependent on a low turnout, high education voter for the Democrat. And so if you look at the data today, you look at consumer sentiment, I think the Trump vote that was anti-Kamala and the swing/independent voter that will make up congressional districts, if the election were today, and I don't know the map like I used to, I would say the Democrats are going to take double-digit numbers, somewhere in the kind of 10 to, let's say, mid-teens. The Senate's a little rough for real estate, but you got the Virginia governor's race in 2025. I'd have to bet on the Democrats now. And then there's
Abigail.
Yeah.
Spanberger,
yeah.
right?
But also, I think you're gonna. If I was doing the other races, I would just make sure there's a Democratic name on every county commissioner, on every city council, on every aldermanic, every school board. Nothing is left, because I think this has to get as many surfboards and surfers as there are, and just fill it up, because I think that's what's going to happen.
A lot of people, I've been
Given
doing,
everything that we know,
yeah.
this April, we're doing this interview, I would say this has a potential. You can feel the momentum of this wave building.
Yeah, I think it's not too soon, because everybody I interview are all my followers, and I think they're a good bellwether, Rahm, about how
Well, I can tell
people
you,
are feeling.
I can tell you 2 people I know of your followers. I really, seriously.
Who?
One is my yoga instructor. She goes, "When the person pounding me to get on your show is my yoga instructor. Amy's my yoga instructor." She goes,
tell her thank
yeah,
you.
Yeah.
Tell her I appreciate it.
Yeah.
But I am doing a lot of interviews, and I get a lot of feedback from my followers.
Yeah.
And I have, a few million people who actually pay attention to the people I'm speaking with. And I would say the majority of people, at least over the last several weeks, now maybe there was a little glimmer of hope in Wisconsin and Florida recently, but they're like, what the hell is going on with the Democratic Party? We'll talk about the Republicans in a moment. But, words like feckless, lacking direction, where's the leader? And I'm curious if you think that's a fair assessment.
Yes and no. That's the honest answer. So one, I describe it as a tale of two parties. One is, I just gave you results out in the country. So there's Democratic voters, they're leading, and they're saying, there's massive energy, and not just among Democratic voters, but also voters who see the Democrats as a better option. So that's one part of the narrative and one part of the story, and shouldn't be ignored because, as I grew up with both President Clinton and President Obama, are kind of big part of my political education. Elections have consequences. You want a Supreme Court justice? Win an election. You want to pass the tax legislation in favor of working families? Win an election. That's A. So that's one side of the narrative. The other side is I don't want to say limited to or constrained, but is around Washington. And I think given the speed in which they were dealing with incoming from President Trump, they got vertigo. They couldn't tell up from down and left from right. And
wasn't that the plan, Steve Bannon flooding the zone?
But you know what? That was his plan. Well, you got to have your plan. I think so. Let me then fast forward. And this is somewhat influenced because of my own view about how the kind of continuing resolution, the funding of government was not dealt with. Wasn't dealt with, was not dealt with. In about, I think it's 6 weeks, if I'm my calculations right, they have to raise the debt limit. And my general rules, I said this that in February this was on the government funding on Kara Swisher's podcast, but I'll say here for the debt limit. I said then you got to have principles. Well, you got to have principles. My principles are I would do something on tariffs, claw back the power, B on taxes, and C on health care. And if you want our support for raising the debt limit, we got three things. Now, you don't meet them. You guys have all the gavels, and you have all the microphones.
That's your art of the deal.
Yeah, well, yeah. You want an art of the deal? Yeah, it's called win-win. It's not called win-lose. You like to win-lose. Well, we're not going to be on that side of the trade. Okay, so we want to claw back power on tariffs because you've actually sent the economy into a recession and working families have been there and stayed there, and now they're there really deeper down. B, here's what we're going to do on taxes as it relates to the wealthy and well-off, and here's what we're going to do as it relates to Medicaid and premium support. You can't cut it to pay for tax cuts for, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and the rest of them. Forget about it. And that's the price. And if you don't like it, that's okay. You're in the majority in the House. You're the majority in the Senate. God willing. And God bless you. But I want to say this. So when in 1994, when Newt Gingrich tried to shut the government down and
contract with America, yeah,
we did
contract for America, right?
Well, it was a contract to America. That's how I remember it. But we had M squared, E squared, Medicare, Medicaid, education, environment. Those were the principles. And you do that, you can't touch Medicare and Medicaid, you can't cut education and environment either. And in the end of the day, Gingrich had to fold. Fast forward to 2013. Now these are around government shutdowns, slightly different also because working for a president's microphone is slightly different than when you're in the minority in the House and Senate. Mm-hmm. It was called the 3 Ps: premium support, parents, kids on their health care, and pre-existing conditions. And so you have to have the principles you enunciate clearly ahead of time. So you can't do it 48 hours beforehand. There's going to be a real need. Now, the Freedom Caucus doesn't like voting for these debt limits. Okay. It's not like we like it either, but as Democrats, but if you want our vote, here's our principles. And they're pretty clear. Your tariffs have created nothing but havoc in people's economy, in people's lives, and in the 401ks and their savings and their college funds for their kids. And we don't think you should cut premium supports and Medicaid to do tax cuts for the rich. And here's what we want for tax cuts. And if not, well, you know the Speaker and you know the Senate Majority Leader, and you can work it out with them.
Let me talk to you about some of the rising stars.
And that, I think, would give you the strength part that people are looking for and direction part that Democrats need to provide.
Yeah.
You always
some kind of counter narrative, right?
Well, I think, look, my rule about politics when I work is what unifies your side and divides the other side. The House and Senate Republicans aren't too happy about tariffs if you're from a agricultural driven state. So you can either go with the president or you can go with your state. You're in a rural state or you're in a tough congressional district, try cutting Medicaid and see if your local hospital survives. So you can either be with President Trump or you can screw your local hospital and all the people it employs. And so my view is I have a very simple, what unites our team and divides the other team.
Do you think that calculation is finally getting to some Republicans who are like, holy shit, my loyalty to Donald Trump is going to cost me. It's not going to protect me.
You know, you say that, so the one thing I would say, look, I'm surprised they've gone this far putting their, principles in a lockbox. And there's as both ambassador, as chief of staff, they're very good. I mean, I can say this about certain House members I worked with and certain senators, Republicans I'm talking about. Very decent people, smart people, care a great deal. I am shocked what they go along with. Now, Democrats, if any president had tried anything like this on the tariffs or anything on the Justice Department, the FBI, Bill Clinton did not fire Louis Freeh. I mean, one of the calculations was the backlash. I'm shocked at this. So, you say to me, when will I don't know when the Republicans are going to stand up. I'm like the last person to ask. I'm like, you must be firm in your opinion. It's your principles you're flexible on. I've never seen anything like this.
What's the explanation? You've been in Washington a long
primaries.
time. Huh?
Fair primaries. I think there's
craven addiction to power over principle.
I don't. Joe, you did my biography. I mean, I love public service. That's clear. Every senator and House member I talk to that's in a slightly marginal, they all talk about. I was talking to one senator the other day. You raise all this money, you spend all this time working, and you hate the job. Really? So do what you want to do. At least 50% of the time. I get calculations about politics. I love politics. You weigh equities and the trade-offs. But you literally spend all this time running around the country raising millions upon millions of dollars with people you hope sometimes you don't want to talk to ever again for a job you hate.
Wait
and
a
it doesn't
second.
make
They hate the job?
A lot of people think a lot of part of Washington is specifically on the legislative side is broken.
Well, they're frustrated, but that doesn't mean they hate it, right? I mean, I think they're frustrated. They went there with good intentions.
No. As I said, that's a good catch. Hate, it's boiling over and spilling over to the other side of the tracks. They're beyond frustrated because it doesn't do. They came to do stuff and with earnest interest. We may not agree on it, but real earnest interest. And I worked with Republican senators and members of Congress and Democrats. But it's just like it's a broken institution that doesn't perform.
Who do you see as the rising stars in the Democratic Party, Rahm?
Well, there's a lot of talent. Once you start naming names.
Can I name some names?
Yeah, I mean,
just to get your reaction?
Sure.
Cory Booker.
We were mayors together. Very eloquent, beyond eloquent. Very understands both big cities and a big state. Talent.
Gretchen Whitmer.
Big fan of Gretchen, and I think she's managed. And again, I don't mean to look to politics, but she managed a purple state effectively and dealt with the legislative branch and made it. I think was kind of, people forget this when everybody talks about the politics today. When she says just build the damn roads. I mean, she caught the mood of frustration well.
Josh Shapiro.
We were, not only texting yesterday, but he called me on Tuesday. We were having a conversation. I'm a fan as well.
Cory Booker is black, obviously. You have Gretchen Whitmer. She's a woman. Josh Shapiro is Jewish. Do you think they could be elected?
Yeah. You cut it off there. I thought you were going to go on. So let me.
I am going to go to some more
So let me
people.
say why I think so. Rahm Emanuel. I got elected in the north side of the city of Chicago. The predecessors that had the seat before me, Dan Rostenkowski, Roman Puczynski, Frank Annunzio, Mike Flanagan, present holders Mike Quigley, and Rod Blagojevich.
That's Chicago, Rahm.
Well, but wait a second. No. Which name does not fit in there? Yeah, Rahm Emanuel. It was a 2% Jewish community. And when I ran for Congress, President Obama used to tease me. I was a birther before anybody. I had to show my passport. I had to show my birth certificate. They had to prove that I was born in the country I could serve. And it was an issue. And it was only the district was only 2% Jewish. I mean, it got ugly because I was running principally against a Polish woman in a Polish district. And some of her backers said some ugly things about my Judaism. And I'll say to you what I have said then. I know the people. I've met them in their L stops. I met them on their front stoops. Good people, raising their kids to know right from wrong, and I trust their judgment. And it turned out right. When I was ambassador to Japan, somebody had spray painted on the fence Nazi symbols. And the next day, still don't know who, some neighbor went over and painted over it. Never came forward. I've asked other. So was there ugliness? There was ugliness, and there was a generosity of spirit. So as I like to, anti-Semitism always existed, always. It's just much more public, and people think it's more acceptable. Now that's one thing. We did work for President Obama, so yes, there's more than a chance for African American to get elected. What's interesting on women, this is political, I'm probably going to get yelled at, so I should watch myself, but I'm here with you. What could go wrong? If you look at Europe, Prime Minister Meloni in Italy, conservative. Margaret Thatcher, conservative. Chancellor Merkel in Germany, out of the Christian Democratic Party in there. Put Scandinavia slightly aside. So I could see in America where it's more likely the first female president comes out of the conservative philosophy than the progressive philosophy.
Why is that?
I just think it has more to do with the voters, etc. On the other hand, let me checkmate what I just said. A governor will have proven something that has a voice in the language of a chief executive. A legislator thinks, operates. When you run for president and when you're president, you have to project three qualities: strength, confidence, and optimism. And it's more likely to come from a chief executive than a legislature. And the public's more likely to accept a former chief executive as a president than a legislature. And I could be proven wrong, but that's my take.
I wanted to ask you about a couple of
That's
other
probably
people.
more politics than you wanted.
No, it's not at all. I think
I
that's
just said that so you
fascinating.
would say that back to
No,
me.
no, I'm happy to get in the weeds about anything with you. But I wanted to ask you about Pete Buttigieg because I think Pete is one of the most impressive politicians of modern times.
Well, that's quite the compliment.
I love that he goes on Fox. I think he's extraordinarily eloquent. Just he's got all the things on his CV, but he's gay. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm not getting into identity politics, but I am just on a practical as a practical matter. Could a gay man, in your view, be elected president of the United States?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, I think it will. But if you had asked me in 1964, when the Voting Rights Act passes, would a black man get elected president? The answer is yes, but not like now. And I think President Obama had the certain kind of as we say in Chicago, je ne sais quoi. Uh, he had that thing right at that moment, post 8 years of President Bush. So he had the combination, and he was coming at the end of President Bush. So do I think that Pete, mayor right next door to Chicago, could get elected? Or not just him, so I don't want to make it singular to him. Could a gay person, male or female, get elected? The answer is yes. I don't think, though, it's going to be immediate, meaning within the next presidential cycle or two.
Because of the candidate or because of his sexual orientation?
I just, I just think it's funny you say no, because I think it's really where the American people are. And I'm a product of this, so let me say one thing. It was always, I got in a little trouble when I was ambassador. I know you found that hard to believe. It was so out of character for me.
You?
Yeah, but they're still an ally. Look at that. 3 years later, they're still an ally. So, Japan's very conservative culture. With other ambassadors, so I want to be very clear, it was like 20 of us. When it came to LGBTQ legislation, kind of led a public notion. This was right before the G7 happens in Hiroshima. And they finally passed like their first piece of legislation on LGBTQ rights, just basically no discrimination permitted. And it was always interesting to me that in Japan, like 80% were pro-gay marriage, but the legislative, the Diet, their parliament, had yet to pass it and still hasn't. Yet in the United States, gay marriage is permitted by law, yet we don't have close to 80% for it. So in many ways, our legal and political systems were ahead of our public opinion. Their public opinion was ahead of their legal and political systems. So my own take is it is doable, but I think there's going to be a comfort level that has yet, and I know I'm going to get yelled at, blah, 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 but you're asking me a political question, so I'm giving you a political answer. Not my personal view as somebody that led the effort in both Chicago and Illinois for the recognition of marriage equality. But I think politically it's going to happen. I just don't think it's going to happen immediately.
Another person that people are speculating about is Gavin Newsom, and that's nothing new. But he has a podcast, and I'm curious how you feel, Rahm, about him inviting people.
I am doing a taping with him tomorrow, so I feel very good.
Okay.
His guest selection's brilliant.
He's other than you, he's had people like Steve Bannon, Charlie Kirk. Yeah. People think it's making a play to be, less progressive, kind of open, crossing the aisle, whatever, however you want to describe it. And there's this sort of whole philosophy, I think, illustrated by Bill Maher's visit to Donald Trump in the White House. Like, how much do you engage with the other side? And I'm just curious about, first of all, Gavin having those people on his podcast, and Bill Maher going to dinner with Donald Trump and saying he was gracious and he's not a crazy guy. He just plays a crazy guy on TV. Now, he was critical about other things, but basically saying, listen, we've got to reach across the aisle. And, if you truly believe democracy is at risk and the things that are being done are morally corrupt, what is the best way to approach it? Being conciliatory, or just
you are
being the resistance?
You are asking a middle child of three boys, because I used to say the middle children wrote a book, War or Peace. We could do either. Let me just, I'm going to give you a story, an anecdote to illustrate a point. I was the one that convinced President Obama to put Ray LaHood, a Republican congressman from Illinois, in his cabinet. Now, Ray and I became dear friends. Why? We used to fly back after congressional votes, and he was always trying to catch a flight to Peoria. We'd land in O'Hare. And one time he was trying to make a short connection, and I was like at 8C, and he was like at 28. So I went back and said, hey, Ray, you got to catch that flight. I said, why don't you take my seat? I'll just, because I'm going to just take the train home. And then we started up this friendship. That friendship led not just to Ray getting the cabinet slot, and we're still dear friends, but more importantly, every other Wednesday when we were in Washington for votes, he would have 6 Republican congressmen, I would have 6 Democrats, and we used to do private dinners. Quiet, when I say private, just upstairs, ties down, sleeves rolled up, and we just let at it. And it was 6 Ds, 6 Rs, and it was different every time. And there's friendships there, and we built friendships. There's not a profile story that's done in my tenure that Senator Dan Sullivan, Republican from Alaska, Susan Collins is a good friend in that effort. Todd Young out of Indiana. So I do believe in not only keeping those channels open. A lot of those people, when things have happened or asked for clarity or talks or discussions, also true about Alan Simpson who just passed away. So I don't think you can have disagreements. I don't you want to use the cliche, you could disagree without being disagreeable, but that's kind of an apropos distinction. And not only, and then also for politics, because if you don't have communication, you're going to have misunderstanding, and that can lead to a bad place. But also, sometimes you're going to build up in your head a perception, and they're going to explain to you, A, that's not the motivation, and B, here's my actual bottom lines. So it's kind of yes and no, and it's both, and we'll have, and if we're going to disagree, it's okay. We'll just go slug it out on Election Day. That's okay. But there's other things that when you cross a line of certain things, and they're principled, no line. That's it. And so I can't give you, here's a hard and fast rule. I suppose if I say that, and then here's my hard and fast rule. Ready? Always have a line of communication that people know how to talk to, because then there's no misunderstandings. And I'm thinking in the context of either House to Senate or White House to the legislative branch. And worst case scenario, I say something to you which you don't want to hear, and you say something to me I don't want to hear. That's the worst case scenario.
So you would have dinner with Donald Trump if he invited you?
Well, I'd probably bring a food taster, but yeah. For him. I would sit down with him, if he said something, and I would tell him. But nobody's ever described Rahm Emanuel as shy and reserved. I tell him what I think. And I think what he's done in the divisiveness of America at the very time, I think what he's done on these tariffs and what it's done to families is horrible. At every great juncture in America when we've had divisions, been blessed by presidents who've found our foundation of common sense. And I think one of the there's no let me say this also when I lived for 3 years overseas. There is nothing I see around the globe that scares me for America. But you go overseas, I learned a lot about Japan. I learned a lot about the Indo-Pacific. You know what I learned the most about? America. And there's nothing that scares me about the future, that if we're organized and have a consensus about our interests in this country, we're unstoppable. And I wrote about it in 2005. I think the country needs universal national service. Katie, you're our generation. It's out. We have a different runway. It's much shorter.
Who's the general who?
McChrystal.
Yeah.
And there's others.
But he is really championed it.
I had him actually in Chicago for Chicago Stories podcast I did, and that was my podcast when I was mayor, and we talked about this. And and the reason I say it is, diversity is not a guaranteed strength. Has an incredible potential, but it also can be an adversary. Our adversaries are actually trying to divide America. And if you don't have an agreement on the foundation, the diversity doesn't work for you. If you do, it's an incredible strength. And when I looked at like the Abraham Lincoln and the Ronald Reagan aircraft carriers that were in Japan when I was there, started under Ronald Reagan, where foreign citizens can serve our armed forces, earn their citizenship. And I did a citizenship ceremony, 17 individuals, 11 countries, 3 continents. Here are these people from the African continent, South America, except other parts of the world, and Indo-Pacific, serving America's interests, its national security, its ideals, and weren't even citizens. And yet on that ship that has aircraft carriers, 5,000 plus people, It's like a little city. There was people from all walks of life, all parts of the country, all faiths, but with a purpose and a mission and agreement on their values. That's what the country needs. And we're not just this ship, a state, etc. We're more than just an aircraft carrier. I think what the country needs is that experience where a kid from the south side of Chicago and an individual from rural Arkansas, where they're doing something together. And it doesn't have to be just a uniform. You can be in Teach for America. You can be doing an environmental cleanup. You can do literacy.
Get us out of our silos.
Well, so this is where both Iran and, I don't mean to do this, so don't, if you have stock in Meta, but social media, Facebook, are dividing us. China, Russia, and Iran are trying to exacerbate our differences. Social media has not brought us together. It has broken us down into little different categories. We have adopted that language and that idea, and we need to find what brings us together. And I think nothing does it like an experience. And I do believe, and then I say this as a father with both a son active duty in the Navy and a daughter on reserve, there is something unifying to that experience that will be with them not just their time, but the rest of their lives. And rather than have a generation growing up on defining what their rights are, I'd like them to actually spend a little time also understanding and appreciating what their responsibilities are. And I think that would make America a much stronger country, and there's nothing China's doing that intimidates me once we get that worked out.
Do you think that would ever happen?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, but it requires an Oval Office leadership. Look, President Obama set up AmeriCorps. In the first, I think it's 7 months of President Obama's tenure, we doubled, this was when Ted Kennedy was ill, he and John McCain had a bill, we doubled the support for national service, both Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, etc. Absolutely. Now, I'm particularly have a bias towards the armed services because of the needs, but I don't think a uniform, and I do think it should be a mandatory 6 months of public service to the country, to your community, yes. And I do think the country would back it up.
You mentioned President Obama. I'm sure you guys are still good friends. I mean, what does he think of what's going on, Rahm?
I spent 2 years speaking for him. I'm not going to do it now, but I based on everything I know about his values, his interests, his beliefs, he's, I'm sure, fit to be tied about where we are both as a country, what we are doing to ourselves. This is self-inflicted right now. Nobody's done anything to us. So just take a step back. China hasn't done anything. Russia hasn't done anything. North Korea hasn't done anything.
Well, Russia did invade Ukraine, so.
But I'm saying current. Yes, Russia invaded Ukraine.
I mean, and by.
No. I mean, but that's a different. Yes, but we should be support. I mean, so let me say one thing. My father's family, before it goes to Palestine, starts in Odessa, so I have a deep concern. And when I was mayor, the Ukrainian foreign minister came to me, and they did a 300-year history of our family going all the way back, and I have the scroll, and I gave it to my father when he was still alive. So I appreciate, yes, Russia invaded Ukraine, but I'm talking about this moment right now, the challenges we have economically, the challenges we have national security, the challenges we have around the globe where nobody trusts us. The biggest challenge we have in the world right now is America's credibility shot. You can't do squat without trust and credibility. We took our allies and treated them like crap, and they were poised to double down on America and double down on our collective interests. And we spit in their face. It's crazy.
Why do you think Trump's doing what he's doing? You know, I think a lot of...
and that's what I think President Obama would say, but he's here, he can speak for himself.
Tell him he needs to do.
Yeah.
Tell your yoga instructor to call Barack Obama. Why do you think he's doing a lot of the stuff he's doing? With tariffs, with Putin, all these different things. Well, everyone, I think, is really scratching their heads. Like, what is the end game? What is the point? Why are you doing this?
It's interesting to me. So let me do one of, having been in the White House for 8 years of my life, the one thing he talked constantly about was tariffs. The one thing they couldn't do is tariffs. The one thing he said will never, no Project 2025 is the one thing they knew how to execute, which I happen to think gives credit to the OMB director, Voigt. So it's weird to me that the thing he said mentioned most, they had no idea what to do about. It's the most chaotic, disorganized, disruptive, and on goal I've ever seen in politics. And has exposed the President of the United States as very weak and not consistent. And if the market goes sideways one day, he'll change his opinion. And he's shown all the vulnerability, no strength, and no consistency. On the other hand, the one thing he said, I have nothing to do with that, never, is the only thing they've executed with some kind of precision. So it's like a split personality to me. That's one.
Which one did
Project 2025, all the cuts, all the things that they're operating, all the people they're getting rid of and the way they're going about it, and freezing and tax on universities. I can just go through the whole list with you. But that they shut down during the campaign. How many times did he say in the campaign? Trump, tariffs, the most beautiful word. And he said it everywhere. I'm going to raise tariffs. Tariffs were going to solve measles from what I know. Everything, tariffs were going to solve every problem. You had a problem? Tariffs. You had this problem, I'm for tariffs.
Well, you didn't believe him about Project 2025 anyway.
I didn't believe it. Ready? Breaking news. I didn't believe a word he said. But to me, what's weird, he mentioned it all the time, and there was no strategic thought at all around it. The one thing he never mentions that I have nothing to do with is the one thing that there was strategery around. That's what's weird. So two...
Strategery being a joke.
That's a George Bush word.
Yeah.
Okay. From Saturday Night Live.
No, he actually said it, didn't he?
I know he did, but then they carried it on and
yeah.
made a kind of a nameplate. But the second thing is, and here's to me what's so... a component of what's reckless. We spent 5 years convincing both Europe and our allies in Indo-Pacific to line with us vis-a-vis isolating China. And they were all there. It was as set at table as you could have. And we didn't, this White House, specifically the president, did not appreciate how much China was in the jailhouse. They were exporting their own domestic economic problems, destroying their other countries' local industrial economies, and countries were willing to organize around the United States and follow America's leadership. And now we're in a situation, China gets out of the gets a get out of jail card. We put ourselves back in the jail, and we've made ourselves the problem, and China looks like the good, responsible adult, and we look like the drunken adult walking around.
Which will lead a lot of countries into China's arms.
Well, not only lead them into China's arms, lead them away from standing shoulder to shoulder with us. I'll give you one specific example. I spent a lot of time on this. Our export controls of high technology against China had Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and the Dutch standing shoulder to shoulder with the United States. And China felt it. We set them back. Now, a week ago, South Korea and Japan, having spent lots of hours building that alliance with the United States. At Camp David, we had an accomplishment that was historic. China, South Korea, and Japan are aligning both their foreign policy and their economic interests against the United States. We're isolated. And Samsung, one of the biggest producers of chips in the world, just cut a deal with a Chinese company that is against the interests of the export controls. And why did that happen? Because nobody trusts the United States. And right when you needed allies most, we don't have any allies. We're the enemy. We're the problem. And this didn't have to happen. This did not have to happen. That's what's so weird. It's literally we treated friend like foe, and we treated foe like friend. Putin is sitting over there and told the president, yes, I love your ceasefire, except for these 25 conditions. And so, in the name of his Orthodox Christian church, he bombed people on Easter in Ukraine. Killed 34 people on Easter. It's a very Christian thing to do. And Putin knows there's no responsibility from the United States. Did you ever think, you're a journalist, you and I collectively here, what do we got, about 60 years in watching or participating in the public?
At least.
Okay, yeah, we're not going to do a real math, okay? We're going to do... Did you ever think in your lifetime the United States at the United Nations would vote with Russia, China, Belarus, North Korea, and Iran? In all your time...
That would be a big N-O.
Yeah, okay, well, it just happened.
I know.
Again, and against England, France, Germany, Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand. We aligned ourselves in both principle and politics with Russia that represses and kills people, China that sent the Uyghurs into camps and represses people, North Korea, Belarus that has no freedoms and arrests and kills people as their own citizens, and Iran. That's what we do. And if somebody had told me that was going to happen, I said, you take a cup and get it to the lab. Give me a break. That's what happened.
Okay, so what the hell? Why? Because I've been talking to so many people who are experts on strongmen and authoritarian governments, and is there an explanation other than the fact that Donald Trump wants to be a dictator?
No, see, not you, Katie, because it is your podcast and I'm not allowed to do that.
No,
but
you can.
No, I'm not
I
going
don't care.
to. There was always a shortchanging that it was just an affinity for styles of autocrats. There is that. There is a component. I mean, look, he says, I like Xi. Look how he controls 1.4 billion people. So there is an affinity for this.
He mentioned Viktor Orban during the debate.
Okay. But he also said that President Putin and him gone through a lot together. Now, who knew they were dating? Okay. But don't underestimate the philosophical agreement. He does it. I mean, I've said this literally 3 months ago in a piece in the Post. He has a strategic alignment with them about spheres of influence. That's the only way you can explain Greenland, Canada, Panama, and that whole idea. He believes Latin and Central America, North America, Central America, and South America are America's sphere of influence. Indo-Pacific, that's China's pond. Europe, well, keep going until it's not comfortable. And he agrees with that. So does he stylistically like the strongman? Yes. Does he like the fact that they have critics get arrested? Yes, he does. But he also philosophically agrees with them. And here's the thing.
More land, more influence?
More power, yeah. And it's an old politics. And here's what he doesn't understand. One, Putin and Xi are laughing at him because they're good at this game. This is not America's game. It hasn't been America's game a long time, over 100 years. Our game is what we just did. The reason, look, Poland, the Czech Republic, Lithuania, Finland, Sweden moved west into NATO. NATO didn't move east. They moved west because they prefer freedom versus the Russian bear. They know it firsthand. They don't want it. Okay? He doesn't appreciate that. Has no sensibility to that. And on China, the reason our allies are working with us is because they need, want, and desire a counterweight to an uncontrolled, untethered, uninhibited China. And America, through our allies, they're not burdens. They're force multipliers at every level. The number one foreign investor in the United States of America, U.S. history for 200, Japan, 4 years in a row. 1 million Americans work for them. 48% of the investments are all in manufacturing. They're the single largest purchaser of American treasuries, which we're going to need a lot of, Japan. Know what do? Spit in their face. You're going to see it. This what your mother used to say? What goes around comes around. Right? How many times do you hear that?
Or you've gotten too big for your britches.
Yeah, and he's now going to learn what it means. And America's alone. And he thinks he's going to play their game. That's not our game.
And you don't think this is going to end well?
No, I don't. I don't see how it can.
Because he tries to turn bad qualities into good qualities. He'll being try to unpredictable.
No, that's not.
And I know you've said he's a terrible negotiator, but
well, you tell me he negotiated a deal with China and not one thing happened in it. That's a bad deal. He negotiated with North Korea. Why? Because he wants it more than them. Tell me how. Let me ask you.
Canada and Mexico, and then
how's inflation going? Day one. How's the peace in Ukraine? Day one. He wants a deal better than Putin, so Putin knows it.
Why do you think people still just worship him?
I think there's
a lot of Americans still do.
Yeah, because I do think this gets back to kind of where we started on electoral politics
and the Democratic Party.
Well, yes, about Democrats, and yes, So my take on 2024, Katie, is there's two parts to it, or three rather. One, when 70% of the country thinks it's heading in the wrong direction, that's just structurally against an incumbent. It got worse from Afghanistan, and the more President Biden kept saying, oh, the economy's good, the headwinds went from 20 miles an hour to 70 miles an hour. Second, below that, I kind of think of it as two races. So President Biden's 9 down, Kamala Harris gets tapped. She runs on the economy all right through the debate, and she goes to +3. She had an 11-point swing. That's not a statistical error. The day after the debate, it's like a schizophrenia. She goes from the economy to democracy. Now, if you care about democracy, which you and I both do, we were yeses and hello. I can't speak for how you vote, but I can speak for me. Why we dropped what got us 11-point, 12-point swing, I have no idea. Third, which is then to the core of your question, which is there are three things in the last 20 years that I think change for America. And this again gets to the core question of what I care most about, which is in 2003, President Bush leads the country to a war of choice based on a lie. There was no yellow cake from Niger. Still never. Thousands of young men and women lose their lives and their livelihood. No knees, no arms. And we spent $1 trillion on a failed experiment built on a lie. And not one person ever held accountable for the worst foreign policy disaster in American history. 5 years later, there's this massive financial meltdown. People lose their homes, and the fat bankers are asking for demanding their bonuses. And not one of those SOBs go to jail. And they're still like impervious. They're shocked that nobody would give them their bonus. And people have no homes, they have no livelihood, they have no equity left for their retirement. So twice in a short period of time, both a lie and liar loans destroy people's lives. And nobody in the elite or in the establishment is held accountable. During President Obama's tenure, I argued for this Old Testament justice that I believed we should have done before health care. But that's why the president gets paid big bucks to make big decisions. Fast forward later, 12 years later, you have COVID. And we're running, and it's the most disruptive thing in people's lives. As I often said, that COVID was bad for the body and not really great for the body politic either. And schools got disrupted, work habits got disrupted, everything got turned up. And Democrats went from the anti-establishment, against the war, against bankers, to scientists telling people how to live their lives. Close their schools. Just sit in the corner. This is what science. Well, I grew up in a medical home. You get a cut, you get a second opinion. And these scientists walked around like they were experts. They had never seen anything like this. I care deeply about this. 6 months in, and Zeke and I had massive arguments about this as former mayor with 84% of his kids are from poverty. What are you doing closing schools? These kids are at home with no education. And we're seeing the consequence of it. And so you tell me why, as he said to President Trump, I will be the instrument of your rage. And people are angry. And you and I are doing this in New York, this interview, right? Not far from here, a CEO was shot, killed. People cheered the killer. There was no, what happened to empathy? That tells you, they never even met the CEO. They don't know. And even some elected officials said, well, you can understand people's killing? And so when we think of politics, you study this, college versus non-college, urban versus rural, male versus female, black versus white. Well, I'll give you the biggest divide, establishment versus everybody else. And everybody else is sick and tired of the established walking around because they basically got three big things wrong and they feel like no culpability or accountability, which is like what I would do. I'm sorry, we messed up. I didn't agree with the Iraq war. I was on the other side on the financial piece. But literally, people have seen the elite never held accountable. And
well,
Donald Trump.
How do you hold people accountable for COVID? I mean, You know,
Well,
I think people made their best decisions based on the information they had, and you'd be singing a very different song if a lot of kids had died of COVID because going to school.
But of course I would, but it was self-evident within 6 months.
You're saying that waited way too long.
The data was, look, first of all, we closed the schools for 2 years. The data is evident. We're now at the worst reading and math scores in 30 years. Full stop. It's also evident kids that are in red states that opened schools earlier are slightly better than kids that grew up in blue states and cities. It's a fact. You can look at it. You can argue it out. Third, within 6 months, it was getting to be very clear that if you didn't have pre-existing conditions and you weren't elderly, the severity of COVID was very limited. It was very clear among young kids, almost zero. So when you say, well, yeah, of course, if that had happened, I wouldn't be sitting here saying, but it didn't happen, and we do now know it. And there was no. And my view is, we shut schools not only one is we shut school front doors. When we opened them, we blew open the bathroom door for everybody and anybody. It's crazy. And parents had kids at home. And now you went from, just take one caveat besides reading and math scores. You used to have a single-digit absentee rate. You're now running close to 26% absentee. We have a habit. Parents and kids have accepted a 4-day school week. What is this? You think in Japan and China, where we're competing against those kids, they're on a 6-day school week. This is insane. And you wouldn't sit here and I wouldn't sit here if it wasn't for an education. We're letting another generation grow up who can't read and can't do math. It's crazy.
Let me ask you, why do you think the establishment that you blame for this was so slow to realize this? I mean, what was in it for them to keep kids out of school?
Well, first of all, there's a tonal piece, let alone substantive, okay? Tonally, you say, look, we don't have all the data, but what we're looking at, and a lot of people, I get early on information, but a year into it, you had patterns of information. You also, on the other hand, I don't mean to absolve the scientists, you had a president of the United States talking about Lysol and other things. And so you were running against the person with the biggest microphone.
Bleach, I think.
Bleach. Yeah, I couldn't remember if it was bleach or Lysol. Thank you for the 10-yard penalty for being the wrong guest. So that to me was, I'm not saying that people had a nefarious motivation, but there was no sense that we were in uncharted territories, no sense that this is our best guess, and it was a guess. And when the data started becoming overwhelming, we didn't want to change our guess. And we were also, this is not to criticize this scientist, that scientist, what happens to your kids for an education or my kids at an education versus what happens for kids who I was responsible as mayor at a different time, up until 2019. Yeah, 83% of children in Chicago are from poverty. You're sending them home. Not only no technology, no supervision. And I think it was insane. It was not a sense of what we were doing, and it ramified and implicated different communities differently. Now that said, time out. That's in the past. Why is there not the urgency now to fix it? We know what Alabama has done for math scores. Only state on 4th grade math scores went up. We know what Mississippi has done on reading. If I was a governor and a mayor that was responsible for the schools, I'd be calling for a national emergency meeting on what we have to do. There's clear paths forward. So that's the rear view mirror. Now what's the windshield? I would be immediately going into one-on-one tutoring for kids that are behind. So you have to stay afterwards. We're going to have longer school days as it relates to reading time and math time until we catch up, including summer, so we don't let the summer, what's called the summer slide, set in.
Is that what Alabama and Mississippi are doing?
One of the things they have done is both the times have been more concentrated on topic. That's one kind of common theme. 2, early intervention, common theme. 3rd, back to fundamentals, common theme. And using one-on-one time is a common theme. So yes, but there's patterns of success here, or rather, not success, success against the tide. But we need a national emergency. Now, when you go back to Ronald Reagan's A Nation at Risk, Bloom Report, you then all the way to President Bush's Leave No Child Behind, President Obama's Race to the Top, President Clinton's Teachers of Excellence, 100,000. Everybody has had a touchstone of education reform and accountability that step by step over 30 years we saw improvement. We weren't, for certain communities, we were at the top tier of international standards. Other communities, it was incremental but steady progress in the right direction. We are at a 30-year reading low and a 30-year math low. Do you have that sense of emergency? Do you have that sense of crisis? You're shaking. I don't think you.
I do.
But do you think hearing out of the national leaders?
No.
Oh, okay.
I do.
I know you do, and
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here if I didn't know you shared that. Yeah, and there's no sense. Ronald Reagan called together. There was the report on A Nation at Risk.
Well, they got rid of the Department of Education.
Well, they've starved it. President Bush did Leave No Child Behind, and the accountability and the testing, et cetera. And you could have reformed that, but we threw it out.
Yeah, a lot of people hated that.
Well, they hated it because we went from
teach to the test
versus testing to teach. Testing was an information to inform teaching, and we were teaching to the test. That said, you didn't need to throw it all out. It's pretty clear that started a bad cycle. And Margaret Spelling has done some really good, interesting work on this. President Obama had Race to the Top, but everything led to one place, improvement on reading and math scores. To me, we are in that emergency moment now, and a president with a modicum of interest would call an emergency meeting, said, okay, we're going to fight about taxes, we're going to fight about tariffs. Kids reading, no politics. Here's what we're going to have to do. And then hold the governors accountable for a 90-day plan on what they're going to do on one-on-one tutoring, basics, etc. But what do? Close Department of Education or starve it of funds. That's our answer to China.
I want to ask you a couple more questions, and I'm going to let you go because you've been so generous with your time, Rahm. But I want to ask you about.
This is therapy.
Oh, good. Good. I'm glad I could be here for you.
Yeah. I left my Blue Cross and Blue Shield card at the front desk.
For the rest of this administration, and perhaps if you listen to Steve Bannon, another Trump term. Yeah. On a scale of 1 to 10, how nervous are you about the damage he could continue to do?
So, he has been president for 80 days, and he's destroyed 80 years worth of work. The one thing, you know why I'm here? I trust you. You and I have known each other, and we didn't always agree. So let's be clear to everybody listening. We didn't always agree. But basically, I trust you. You bring credibility as a journalist. I trust you. Hopefully you invited me here because we may not all agree on our analysis or my solutions. There's trust. You think Germany trusts us? You think Italy trusts us? You think Nigeria trusts us? You think Japan trusts us now? No.
But what does that mean for Donald Trump?
You got 200 weeks left. So think of it that way. In 80 days, he's taken 80 years worth of work of building credibility through Democrat-Republican presidents, Democrat-Republican Congresses, and he's severely damaged it. The single greatest crisis we have is not China's. Nobody believes or trusts America anymore.
So you're talking about the international stage, right?
That's one. I also think it's also true here at home. I think it's very true at home. And so when you say to me, the core question, not just internationally, but it's such an impact on what we're trying to do economically here at home.
But also democratic norms and institutions, like saying he's going to investigate Chris Krebs because Chris said he didn't think the election was rigged. Totally, weaponizing the Justice Department, something he railed against. all these things that are not listening to judges or belittling judges. I'm talking about like internally, Ron. Obviously internationally that's a huge concern, and I can see how your view has been expanded by your experience being an ambassador. But what about here at home?
Here at home, it's where we started. We have turned on each other and seen each other. I mean, we this is like a Game of Thrones. This is like the Braveheart paint, and everybody's putting it on, and it's a battle. But he's turned on the institutions of higher learning. There's a lot of things that should have been reformed, but the way he's doing it, it's gonna this interesting. Let me pause there. His assessment of the problems is not always wrong, like as it relates to the potential to bringing manufacturing jobs or have his solution is worse than the illness. It's like there's a lot of higher institutions of higher learning should have been reformed earlier on, should have been addressed earlier on, not just on the culture, but also on how they spend money, etc. But he's going to destroy the goose that lays the golden egg in the United States. And he has politicized the Justice Department. And I will just say this as it relates to the Supreme Court Justice Roberts. When he was confirmed, he famously said, what do? We just call balls and strikes. Well, we're going to go see how good his eyesight is, because this is coming to his court. And he has to show, either you and I learned, or at least I learned, 3 equal branches of government. Not one among all equals. No, that's not what we learned. I learned 3 equal branches of government. One branch controls the purse strings. And
sometimes.
Sometimes when they're doing their job. And the court, very specifically, is going to have to, as he said, call balls and strikes. Well, we're going to find out, whether he can see.
But aren't we going to find out if Donald Trump can hear?
Yeah, that's going to be a case.
See what I did there?
Yeah, I did. I saw it. I got it. Yeah, whether you can hear the crowd booing. But
hear what the justices say.
Yeah, I understand. Take a look at what he's done with the court as it relates to the person in El Salvador. So, I think this will have ramifications beyond, every president has a tenure, and then they have a legacy that's left behind that is like a bomb blast that reverberates past the specific time they serve. And this will have a lasting impact at home, and obviously abroad, and in the economy.
So, scale of 1 to 10 on the worry meter?
I'm very worried, although I don't underestimate the resilience of the American people. But don't. I mean, I know you rolled your eyes. I don't know if people could see it. Like, roll it. Okay, I saw it. I'm calling you out. Like that. It looked very familiar to some of my children at the kitchen table when I say so. Oh, God, here goes Dad again. No, the American people, when called to, it's an incredible resilience. They haven't been called to, and it is also, they haven't, so I think the ramifications of what Donald Trump's are doing is grave and serious, not just for now, but for years later. But there is a core piece to the American people which, when there is that leadership, they will answer not just the call, the responsibility that comes, but they have not been challenged to do that.
And you see glimmers of that.
I see it, I see a lot of it in local, not just politics, in local communities. Yeah, I do. I see people coming together,
Well, you also see protests.
But protests is one manifestation. But I see people, when you see a family hurt in your community, people volunteer to do things, etc. So I do. And I see people across faiths, across class, across race, across gender, working together and doing things in common purpose. In a weird way, having been national and then local as a mayor, there's more common purpose locally than there is national. I used to jokingly said, DC's, Disneyland on the Potomac. Okay, but you go to a city, you go into a community in that city, there's more purpose, there's more unifying kind of texture and threads that bind people. That has been lost, which is why I believe so firmly in the kind of almost antibody that national service would provide. Because we look, I've been very influenced by this book of Boys and Men by Richard Reeves, and John Hayes' book, as it relates to technology.
The Anxious Generation.
Yeah, the Anxious Generation. That we have this generation slipping through our fingers, and I think that not that national service in and of itself will solve, but it does. It's the best antidote and kind of biotic against this kind of aimlessness. And I say this to you, Katie, the hope in a child's eye and the sound of optimism in their voice. There's many, not just adolescents, but young men and women, who there's an emptiness to their eyes and a hollowness to their voice that is eerily scary. And we have to give them not just hope again, but actually a self-confidence.
Or this feeling that the future is
bleak.
is not going to be better. That the future is depressing and kind of a why bother attitude.
Well, I mean, they have a phrase in China, the generation, I forget the exact phrase, but it says a lying down generation. We in America have kids lost to substance abuse, lost to technology, and it's just...
Or just lost.
Yeah, and there's not the hope in their eyes and the hope in their voice, and it's aimless. And I think there's something in the spirit of America that can be renewed, should be renewed, and with that, there's nothing that will hold America back.
You are someone who is intimately familiar with the inner workings of the White House. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, I know you're not in there now, but as an observer and someone who says, the only people around the president, the only 4 words they know are what? What did you say? Yes, sir, Mr. President?
They're
or something?
limited. Their grasp of the English language is limited to 4 words. Yes, Mr. President. Yes, sir, Mr. President.
So,
trust me, President Obama and President Clinton sitting in this chair, those were not the 4 words I used to say.
I'm sure. And you look at the cabinet meetings, and everyone goes around praising Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, it's freaky.
Including his doctor that tells you his golf game's great.
Right?
Yeah.
Victorious golf games.
Yeah,
not
just that he plays all. Yeah.
That he's victorious.
Yeah.
I like Rick Riley's book, Commander in Chief, which is all about Donald Trump's golf habits. But I guess my question to you is, who do you think's pulling the strings right now? Do you think it's Stephen Miller? Who is the great kind of puppeteer behind the scenes, if there is one?
Well, there's 2 people. I mean, one is Chris Voigt over at Office of Management and Budget, OMB. There's no doubt when you look at how one piece of the White House is the decimation of what they quote-unquote call the deep state. It's been methodical. They've been thinking about this for 4 years. Every step, every dollar, every penny, every person. Like methodical. The tariffs is all Donald Trump. Chaos everywhere. No, and there's the one thing that he said he was going to do. There was no strategy and theory of the case and how to apply it. And you can see that let me say, here's my test. 2 tests. Ready?
Yeah.
We were doing tariffs for fentanyl. When was the last time you heard fentanyl uttered by a single member of the cabinet or the President of the United States?
Well, I think they're blaming Canada
for
fentanyl
but you haven't heard it. You haven't heard it in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay. Tells you. Originally, we were doing tariffs because of fentanyl. I haven't heard it. Second, it's all about manufacturing renaissance back in America, right? Elon Musk has a factory in...
I like how you call him Elon.
Yeah, Elon Musk.
Elon.
No, Elon Musk. I'm giving you Elon. Elon Musk has a factory in Shanghai. 20,000 people work there. He has a factory in Berlin. 12,000 people there. When he resources those factories back to the United States, the tariffs are incredibly successful. Until that happens, those factories are going to stay there, and that means we're not repurposing the United States manufacturing renaissance. And he's been fighting this because he tells you it's crazy. So I think, as it relates to that, I think the President of the United States makes it up as every day because it's all about fill, shiny baubles, fill the news cycle, etc. And it's about his narcissism. And the guy that's methodically executing the attack on quote unquote whatever the deep state is Chris Voigt. And I think that's the guy. This is not a criticism, because it's everybody, in the end of the day, as I used to say about every White House, the fish rots from the head down. I don't know where the chief of staff is. And I'm not saying the way I did it, or the way Leon Panetta did it, or the way Jim Baker did it, or the way Ron Klain did it, or the way Jack Watson did it for Jimmy Carter, or Josh did it
for George W.
For George W. Bush.
Josh Bolton.
Yeah, Josh Bolton. But I call him Josh because we're friends.
No, I know. No. Just for listeners or viewers.
Which is another example of, we used to talk all the time when I was a congressman, Democrat, and he was a president's chief of staff. We always had conversations. I would tell him, here's how we're going to do it. This is what's coming to a theater near you.
You know what's crazy? I can't remember who the chief of staff is.
For Susan Giles.
Oh, Susie Wiles, of course. Yeah. Because she's so invisible.
That's why I was
sorry. I knew it was Susie Wiles, but for a moment I was like, wait, who is the chief of staff?
That's my point. You have markets are blowing up, the economy's blowing up, the president's job approval has dropped 12 points.
What do you think she's doing?
What are you asking me? Do you think I got a secret password? I have no idea. I have nothing. I couldn't explain this to you. It's weird.
I want to ask you in closing about the Democratic Party. I know we talked about that for a moment.
Can I come back next week for season 2?
But I want to ask you about something you recently said, Ron.
Uh-oh.
We use to describe the way Democrats communicate. Yeah. You said, quote, "We use language to feel good about ourselves, not to communicate. We all act like we're trying to become an adjunct professor at a small liberal arts college. It's insane." So what does the Democratic Party need to do? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm from Chicago. You got neighborhoods, Porridge Park. I can give you all kinds of different neighborhoods. Bridgeport, McKinley Park, Marquette Park, right? I'm not taking anything away from the idea, so I don't want to hate mail. How many people do you think at a local diner say the word oligarch? What's wrong with rich? Abundantly rich, super rich, billionaire rich, oligarch. How many people do you think at a local diner say oligarch?
Very few.
Very few? Maybe Harvard Square, and I don't even think...
Maybe the line cook.
Okay,
I'm kidding.
I don't know. So my view is, we talk to ourselves. Now, I get the spirit of what is being done out there, and you can see by the crowds, but the marketing material calls oligarchs. Now look, maybe Chicago's not representative of the country, but I think there's it's a very interesting, not hodgepodge, but kind of a mosaic of different communities from different parts of the world. There's 147 languages spoken in our public school system. Maybe the family of the oligarchs know about oligarchs. Who does this? So we talk to ourselves and feel good. I'll give you an example in the tax code. They have the death penalty, the death tax, the marriage penalty tax. We have the earned income tax credit. Who does this? It's a committee of very thoughtful people that met and communicate to very thoughtful people. You've got to understand where the American people live their lives. You've got to understand how they live their lives. And you have to find, and I'll give you a classic. I hate this philosophy. I hate this whole term. I hate the whole thing as a person whose uncle was a Chicago cop. We're going to defund the police. And when you call them on it, they said, well, this doesn't mean what it says. Well, then don't use the English language. Because I don't know if you know this, the English language is meant to communicate. So when you say defund the police, there's only one interpretation people can have. But you call people on it, and their first answer is, well, it doesn't mean what it says. So you want to know why we're losing black voters, Hispanic voters, Asian voters, Silicon Valley? Because we talk in a way in which people don't understand. We communicate things
you had me until you said Silicon Valley.
We lost Silicon Valley.
But that's not because people are saying the word oligarch.
No. Well, I don't know. They may be the oligarchs we're talking about. No,
they are the oligarchs. You're right.
Yeah, but we talk we not only talk, but we communicate in a way that says more about how we feel about ourselves than trying to persuade somebody. And the first thing you should do is talk and communicate a set of ideas and values of where people live their lives, which is what animates me, and I think this is the most important thing. You and I were just talking about aimlessness, loss, and loss of hope. All people want is a shot at the American dream, and all they gotten is a shaft for 20 years, both parties. And we owe them the decency, not a guarantee, of a shot.
You sound like Bernie and AOC.
No. Well, you say that, but we started here, I don't know. Bernie talks about free community college. I did free community college. Free college he talks about. I did free community college in Chicago. I raised the minimum wage. I did universal pre-K. There are values that we hold. We may not agree on the means, but on the ends, in the sense of equity, in the sense of giving people a shot and a voice. Yeah. I mean, when I was in Congress, it was my bill to re-import pharmaceutical drugs, to report Canada's prices. Bernie and I worked on it together.
Do you think Bernie and AOC are the future of the Democratic Party? They are attracting huge crowds. They are out there energizing people everywhere.
Well, I think people are energized. That's what the part. A lot of people want to assume power starts in Washington. People are already energized. They are putting a spotlight on it. I have to run. Because you said 2 questions for ago, and am I staying for dinner? What's for dinner? And it's Passover. I can't have bread. As I said to somebody, you die, we eat. You're born, we eat, and we eat between those 2 events.
Well, go eat.
All right, I love you.
Thank you, Rahm.